Hi everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by Inglis and Darley. Today, changes at the Australian Turf Club, Australia's plans for more Group 1 races at knocked on the head, prize money freezes for a spring star, and an extensive chat with Godolphin Australian Managing Director Andy Makiv. Impending and bloodstock, the end of an era for Galileo, Tin Australia learned from America's sales success, and the first crop of a fresh batch of sires are ready to hit the track. And in wagering, have we seen the tipping point in point and consumption tax? Mixi officially takes control of PointsBet, and the industry prepares for media scrutiny. Tim, welcome aboard. We are in the heart of spring, Group 1 racing every week, yet head office politics at the Australian Turf Club is still grabbing headlines. You was probably suspected for a couple of weeks that Matt Galanis was on his way out there at the ATC, and as it played out on Tuesday, the announcement finally came out that Matt Galanis was departed his role as chief executive.
Well, it's probably been going on a bit longer than 2 weeks, I'd say, probably from when Tim Hale was elected chair, probably in early July, I think it was. There's been speculation that there would be changes at executive level. Possibly, there was suggestion perhaps would be Steve McMahon that would go, given he was the face of the pro Rose Hill sale, I guess. But in the end, they've chosen to punt Matt Galanis, and it probably wasn't pretty. I'm sure all parties would have liked to have been not as messy as it was, but they've reached this conclusion. And Matt gave 12 years at least to the ATC, but I think from a board point of view, they needed to be seen to making change. They can't keep doing the same thing over and over. There is commercial issues with the club, or the way they try and manage their racing business and business full stop, making it pay with declining Tabcorp and wagering revenues. And so, Steve McMahon's interim CEO at the moment, and they'll go about employing a new CEO permanently. Probably after the Everest, they'll get stuck into that. But they've, announced a couple of new committees and things like that from a board level point of view, trying to get members back on side. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next few months and trying to reunite the membership.
Yeah, what will be interesting too is when, obviously it's annual report season with people putting out their annual reports. The next couple of months, we'll see what the ATC's balance sheet looks like. You would suggest that given the events of the last 18 months, it's probably not great, and it may possibly reveal how much was spent around the ill-fated Rose Hill proposal. So there'll be a fair bit of scrutiny around that. As you said, Steve McMahon's the man that gets elevated. Now, obviously he was, as you said, the face and the architect of the Rose Hill idea. It's fair enough to say that's how it worked through. But Steve's sort of moved to the top job, probably unusual that an interim CEO would be welcomed by an official statement from New South Wales Trainers Association. Not surprising given that's where he used to work. But Chris Waller giving him endorsement as well around that. So I don't know, New South Wales racing politics we know is tricky and complex. Yeah, but it's interesting to see how this one plays out and whether we move beyond, I guess, the spring, whether Steve McMahon then gets appointed the CEO on a long-term basis or someone else comes in. We'll have to wait and see. Another recurring issue, which we never tire of talking about here on Straight Talk, Tim, is the pattern. You've been following that issue quite closely and led the reporting of this, to be fair. The Asian Patent Committee considering Australia's pitch for 4 Group 1s and seemingly endless amount of other upgrades for black-type races last week. The APC said no. Yeah, it's an interesting point of where to now. Australian racing's this is not a great sign for Australian racing that, doesn't seem to be any form of coordinated approach on this whatsoever.
Well, I think it's going to force the PRAs and the, Racing Australia directors to the table if they want to push forward. And, obviously Racing New South Wales wants Golden Eagles and races like that to be Group 1s, and there's races elsewhere to be upgraded and things like that, that they have to come to a workable resolution. We've spoken about this ad nauseum for weeks, but they need to, and the Patent Committee have told them, you need a working Patent Committee. And I don't think it's just a ratings-based, guidelines that I don't think that's going to satisfy the Asian Patent Committee. There needs to be some sort of overarching committee that would use ratings as part of their decisions of what's upgraded and, just as importantly, what's downgraded and things like that. And, we've seen, New Zealand are playing their part in the international...
They're playing by the rules. I mean, the reality is New Zealand's playing
right.
by the rules. They've downgraded a Group 1 this week. Now, with I think you and I were trying to rack our brains the last time an Australian race was downgraded from Group 1. We're thinking 2011. New Zealand are playing by the rules here. They downgraded a Group 1 recently, and they've done it again now. And they've also moved a couple of their key Group 1s, including the New Zealand Oaks, around in order to make sure that they're trying to maintain, the right rating to ensure that they can be considered Group 1s ongoing. I mean, they're playing by the rules. Australia, for right or for wrong, are making up their own rules.
Well, the Thorndon Mile, part of this announcement earlier this week after the patent committee meeting, Thorndon Mile's been downgraded, which comes, Levin Classic last season was downgraded as a Group 2. So, they're playing by the rules, and I know there's people in New Zealand that suggested why don't they do it like Australia and just upgrade things, but they want to be part of an international bloodstock industry and the valuations that are placed on that. And we hear from Andy Makiv a bit later that, he touches on the patent and the importance he places on it from a global perspective. So, can the PRAs and the Racing Australia delegates get together and actually come to a workable solution without, legal threats and things like that just continually hanging over this long-running debacle, I guess you'd describe it as. Nothing else, really.
Yeah, indeed it is. Just wanted to touch on another one, which sort of speaks to the challenges of Racing Australia and a federated model. And, we ran a story this week about a horse that ran second at Flemington on Saturday called Navy Pilot, still running under the name of Phoenix Thoroughbreds, which most people in the industry will now be aware as sort of exited the industry. Their founder and managing director, Amir Abdulaziz, is now in a jail in America regarding his association with money laundering, serving a 15-month term. Under the Australian rules of racing, he would be determined not to be a person that could own a horse. The prize money around this horse has been frozen while we sort this out. It would appear that this is another example of a state-by-state issue, Tim, where we've got some of his horses have been transferred to Brookdale Racing, which is owned by another Bahraini national, but someone who is determined to be, want to proceed. So Brookdale Racing has this horse races in the Brookdale Racing colours, but in the race book and under the name, he's still raced on a Phoenix Thoroughbreds. It's a disconnect between two states and how quickly they've been able to do this. And Tim, we raised this issue or spoke about this issue 6 or 7 months ago. It beggars belief that we're still sitting here now, 6 months later, and a horse is going into the spring, and he might be a horse that could contend in a Group 1 race, whether it be the Caulfield Guineas or the Coolmore Stud Stakes. He's a seriously well-bred and promising horse. How has this not been sorted? The attitude's pretty much like, well, it's kind of a race in Australia, or maybe it's racing New South Wales. I mean, I'm not too sure how this plays out, Tim, but it seems like a bit of a mess to me.
Well, I'll give credit to Racing Victoria. At least they get back to us. Bren, we've tried other Racing New South Wales and different authorities trying to seek clarification and answer on this, and they don't get back to us, and that's their prerogative. They don't have to, but it'd be nice from an industry point of view and transparency to say, yes, we are transferring them over to Brookdale, or this is why we're not. Different, obviously Racing Victoria had agreed to transfer pretty much all the bloodstock interests registered in Victoria to Brookdale Racing, and they deemed that was fine. But there's still a few hanging around like Saturday with Navy Pilot.
Yeah. And I think, I would think an industry where we've had a significantly high-profile owner elsewhere jailed over serious offences, which was a black eye for the industry, would be much more proactive around this stuff to make sure that we're not having people who are discredited in the ownership of horses. Anyway, we move on now to Australia's one of the biggest owners in the world, actually, Godolphin, of course, and Andy Makiv. We had a good chat with Andy yesterday, a very extensive chat. Now, strap yourself in. This is a really good conversation. It goes for about half an hour, but a fantastic conversation with Andy around about the state of play at Godolphin Australia and what we can expect moving forward. And joining us now on Straight Talk is Andy Makiv, Managing Director of Godolphin Australia. This Saturday marks 12 months since Andy was appointed into the role on a permanent basis. It's certainly been a big 12 months, Andy. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
Talk us through, obviously the most significant aspect of probably the last few months particularly has been this transfer from the private trading model to a public trading model. How is that how is that logistically planning out in the lead up? And then how have you sort of viewed of how that's sort of played out over the last 6 weeks as sort of things have sort of hit the ground?
Yeah, well, obviously, the history behind Godolphin's private training stable in Australia was from the purchase of Woodlands back in 2007, 2008, wherever that might have been around that time. So the purchase of that massive operation that was the Ingham's Chickens back in the day meant that what came along with that was a whole heap of mares, some stallions, horses like Monroe, obviously, and Commands, which was fantastic, some properties and a racing stable with Peter Snowden, etc. So as time went on, back in those days, we had big numbers in training. We obviously had 180 or so of our own mares added to that 300 odd Woodlands mares and a big racing stable. And as time went on, it was a successful operation. But we've reduced our numbers, and we reduced our numbers, mare numbers, etc. The stables were obviously very big in terms of fixed costs, essentially, and also big in terms of the operation. And it dawned on us that there was potential to look at doing it differently. At the same time, James's contract was coming to a close, and he was obviously either looking to renew the contract, looking to go and train out on his own, and as it turns out, and or go to Hong Kong. So there was an opportunity to look at everything, look at the operation, and think, is there a different way of doing this? We gave it some thought. We obviously did a lot of work on it, and thought that as part of our evolution, there was an opportunity to do similar things that they do in America, or a similar business to the Godolphin American business, and use outside trainers and hope that we had a similar impact in terms of successful results, but also be able to be more involved in the market, more involved in the broader bloodstock community, not be so insular, and take that leap. So it was a big leap at the time, and a lot of work went into it, and I think it started pretty well.
Andy, you've taken on 9 public trainers thus far, and at the time you haven't ruled out possibly supporting others. How's that relationship going? As we know, it started very well positively on the track, but in terms of the back end, managing, going from a private stable to dealing with 9 different trainers, how's that going?
Yeah, it's been really good, actually. I mean, there's obviously trainers that we had a relationship with previously as a company, people like Sam and Anthony Friedman who were training for us anyway. And there's people that I had a great relationship with, whether it's Kieran Maher or the Hayes family that I'd had a previous life with, I suppose. We did speak to, pretty much everyone that reached out. So, and look, to a man and woman, they're all extremely impressive. And these are the top end, in the country at what they do. So, even we spoke to some people that we didn't ultimately give horses to. And I made the point that doesn't preclude them from the future, because they're such talented people, talented horse people, and, who knows what the future brings. So delighted with the 9 so far. They all bring something different. They're quality people, quality horse people, and who's to say there won't be more or changes in the future? Like, they're contractors, aren't they? So it's exciting to be the client for a change. Anyway,
what does it? You alluded to it before, but what does this? I guess that focus of not having to operate a private training model. What does that do for the broader business? You no longer have to necessarily concern yourself with what's going on stable day to day anymore as a business. This has all been done from the outside. Does that allow you greater bandwidth to focus on other things, Andy?
Oh, well, firstly, we've got, a similar number of horses in training, so similar number on the books. So there's certainly a bloodstock and racing team that are working pretty hard. So they're monitoring, every horse's day-to-day activity. They're keeping spreadsheets of what they're up to. There's a lot of moving parts in terms of horses in and out of training, back and forth to farm. So certainly that part of it means that we are still very busy managing, 220 odd racehorses that are currently on our books. So, our numbers are similar in terms of, there's less involvement in terms of staff and, workplace relations and health and safety and all the things that go with managing a racing stable. But certainly the management of the racehorses is still pretty busy and still pretty active. If you said to someone like Jason Walsh he didn't have much on, he'd get pretty offended, I think. So he's certainly busier, as is his team. So, we're very grateful to have such a good team with him.
Some of the infrastructural facilities that Godolphin had or has, obviously, Crown Lodge at Warwick Farm and the Agnes Banks facility, what happens to them going forward? Is there a plan with them, Andy?
Well, obviously, we leased Carbine Lodge at Flemington, and Chris Waller's taken that over, so that sorted that out. Crown Lodge, we are in the process of working out what we're going to do there. That's obviously a decision for the trust. So our business sits in a trust. So the trustees are very interested in the assets of the trust. So we're in conversations with them as to what we will do. And that, I think there's something in the wings pretty soon as to some direction on where we're going to head in those areas. We're conscious that they are wonderful horse facilities. They're currently empty. So, we're very conscious that, or when I say they're empty, they've got office staff, etc., and a few things going on, and gardeners and track maintenance guys and whatever. But at the end of the day, we're very wary that they're wonderful horse facilities, and we'd like horses to be there on them. So whether that's the asset being sold to someone to purchase and take on, or lease, one of the two things will be happening at some stage in the next 6 months.
And as we said, on the track, it started very, very well, and probably no more impressive than Tempted last week in the run to the Rose. Where does she go now? There's been a couple of Everest slots taken this week. Could she fill the Godolphin one, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. She's going to run in the Golden Rose, her and Bay Vogt. I was going to say stablemate, but they're not stablemates anymore. So they'll both, they're M1-2 in the lead up. So it would seem that both should be given their opportunity in the main race, in the Golden Rose. You'd think that she's obviously very good, and she seems to be a logical selection for a race like the Everest for us on our slot. Bayvoc's also an opportunity. So is Tentaris, maybe the Freedman runner. But we also could have an open mind to using an outside horse. We do run a very extensive and significant stallion business. So, it's not lost on us that horses like Angel Capital and War Machine are by Harry Angel. So, at some stage, a conversation may happen with some connections of Darley's side horses. So that gives another avenue to the benefits of having a slot. But at the same time, we'd obviously like to have a Godolphin runner, and as you alluded to, Tempted would seem, the most impressive and the most logical and the most highly rated opportunity for us.
It's a bit of a different process for you guys around that this year, because most of the time, obviously you had others, you had two stables effectively with the Freedmans and James previously, but now you've sort of got other, multiple trainers sort of having to negotiate this. Does it become harder to sit there and go, well, we kind of have to pick one over another, and trainers sort of have to make their case that their horse might be might be more preferred over another?
It hasn't as yet. They're very mindful and very, very understanding. So we've only just started. So certainly things have been very easy, but they've obviously got other horses as well. So that opens things up. A conversation with the Hazes on War Machine, or a conversation with Chris on Angel Capital, or that gives us another avenue as well, a relationship with those stables. So it works both ways. I think we can work out what suits us best. Obviously, we're a stallion business as well. So there's some strong, conversations around what best suits Bay, what best suits Tentaris, because we have, strong ambitions that they might join a roster one day. So, the other conversations, do you not run a Tempted against the Bay What? So they're sort of other things that you just need to factor in always, because you're trying to give your colts the best opportunity, but we also want to see our fillies go well, and we also are supporting Street Boss, who's a stallion on the roster, who's Tempted as well. So there's a lot of moving parts, but ultimately the best horses obviously find hopefully the best outcomes.
Obviously, Godolphin is bought in as a slot holder to the Everest, and I'll admit I wasn't a believer to start with, but I've been turned to the success of the Everest. Do you see Godolphin maintaining its association, or as a slot holder in the Everest longer term, or have you thought about that, or where that's going?
Well, I'm certainly a bit slow to cotton on to change too, Tim. So I initially thought the Everest was a bit of a beat up, but I must say it's as good a race day as there is in Australia. So credit to those that created it and created the day. It is an unbelievably great race day, and I think it's a great day to be involved in and to participate in. So for us at Godolphin, I'm very pro wanting to continue. I think we should always all strive to have a horse good enough. That's what we want to do. We want to have great race horses, and we're going to continue to hopefully breed as many as we have in the last sort of at least 7 years. So we're looking to always compete at the highest level, and I think you're a bit naive to think that the Everest isn't the highest level. So we're certainly pro the concept. And if by chance, as I said, we don't have a horse good enough, which hopefully doesn't happen very often, we've always got another avenue to potentially support those that supported us through the standing roster and or through relationships with other trainers or anyone really. But hopefully we'll most years have a Godolphin Blue competitor.
What about the yearling sales, Andy? We've seen Godolphin have an in and out presence at the yearling sales over the past few years. Well, what could we expect in 2026? Do you anticipate you guys to be playing, and buying yearlings out of the yearling sales upcoming?
We're pretty conscious of the fact that we need to diversify our bloodstock. So that's one thing. So buying yearlings, whether it was an In Secret or a Exhilarates or a Inhibitions, whoever it might be, buying them as yearlings brings in different bloodlines to our broodmare band. So we're very conscious that that is important. We've got a lot of Exceed and Excel blood, obviously, a lot of Street Cry blood, a lot of Lonhro blood. So we're wary of that, but we can also send our mares out as well. So the other way we can diversify our bloodstock a bit is to be able to support other stallions. So rather than buying Inhibitions by Zoostar, we send a couple of our nicer mares to Zoostar. So we've certainly looked at that, and we are supporting outside stallions this year. And we have in the past as well. Horses like Bivouac are out of More Than Ready mares, and we bred Dazzler, who was by More Than Ready. So all those years ago, she went out. So there's certainly examples of that diversification of bloodstock has real benefit on what we're trying to achieve. So two ways for us to do it, obviously, are buy yearlings or send mares out. So we've done it both in the past. We've committed to sending mares out for this year, and we've talked about it at senior level to say that we want to commit to that program for years and years to come. So we're certainly committed to using outside stallions. Where we get to on yearling sales next year, I'd love to be involved, but we haven't got to that stage yet. But we got to the mating side of it this year, and are supporting outside stallions for a reasonable amount of money.
Andy, I was being told, when John Ferguson was sort of in charge of Godolphin quite a few years ago, that he made a big point of ensuring everyone was included and had, Sheikh Mohammed engaged. How's that going now? And what's, the Australian arm relationship with Sheikh Mohammed and more globally, the upper level of Godolphin management overseas?
It's an interesting question because we are certainly different companies. So as much as we rely on each other and the brand, we are accountable for our own jurisdictions. So that's an important piece to understand, that we've got to stand on our own 2 feet like Japan does, like America does, etc. So, and that's been something that we're looking at to ensure that we are an efficient, sustainable business. But at the same time, we can't be as successful as we've been without the shuttle stallion. So our relationships with America, to get a horse like Sovereignty potentially down in the future would be amazing. Triple Group 1 winner, Kentucky Derby winner like him. Our relationship with the UK and Ireland, where we can get access to horses like Too Darn Hot coming back, and Pinatubo and Harry Angel and Notable Speech maybe next year, and also even looking at stallions in Japan. So the whole company works together really well. We've always, we've got long-standing relationships with, so irrespective of Dubai in itself, which is obviously, where we gain all of our, our motivation and whatever from, our relationships with each country as well is so important to our bloodstock. So, we do talk, every other night with someone from America or someone from Japan or someone from the UK. So it is very much a company that we're very well engaged. And fairness to John, back in the day, he made sure that we all travelled a lot. So, we know, Alistair's talking to someone in the UK. I'm talking to someone in the UK. Jason Walsh will talk to the vets in the UK. So likewise, I'm talking to Dan Pride in America and Harry Sweeney in Japan. So it's very much a company that we've all been around a long time. We all know each other very well, and we're all on the same path of trying to achieve greatness, trying to get those results that Godolphin had on the Kentucky Derby Guineas weekend, Kentucky Oaks weekend. So those amazing things are not lost on anyone around the country, around the world.
We haven't, from a racing perspective, we probably haven't seen that sort of flow back and forth as much in recent years. Obviously there was a time there where some imports came out here and performed very well. Can you see that being regenerated in the future, or is that just a past year, Andy, in terms of the racing stock sort of coming, European-based racing stock primarily coming out here?
I suppose my answer is I don't really know. It was a wonderful period. Obviously, some of those horses were wonderful horses, and they kept the Godolphin name up in lights through those periods. Great horses like Hartnell, and they've been great flag bearers for the company. There are a lot of racing jurisdictions around the world that a lot of these horses do compete in, Dubai included. So they're essentially decisions for the UK part of the business. If they want to send horses down, we'd be receptive, but at the same time, our focus is on, as I said, we're a stallion business. Our real focus is, that was great fun and it's great on a race day, but our focus is on getting cylinder into the shed, getting broadsiding into the shed, and achieving those results with really good colts. Broadsiding by a shuttle stallion, 2 Done Hot, so making sure we can get 2 Done Hot to stand in Australia. He's out of a street cry mare who's a shuttle stallion from America. So that's not overnight. That's 20 years in the making to get a colt like broadsiding into the shed. And that's really our focus and where we put our energy.
As you just alluded to, the state of the Daily Stallion roster, and we've spoken to Arvin and Alistair about this previously on the podcast, that it is in a very good space at the moment with Animo coming through, and you'd hope one or all of them make it. That you've again gone from Exceeding Excel and Lonrose to this next generation coming through of top racehorses that have the potential to be top stallions as well.
Yeah, as you said, I mean, Exceeding Excel, Lonrose, Street Cry, Teofilo, Debawi, Shamadale, Commands, Medaglia Jora, they were like there as a constant. So we had a wonderful period, and that flows on to having, a wonderful racing program. And there was a period there where some of our better older horses were by impending or by exosphere. And that's okay. Like, you've got to try. They didn't develop into being great stallions, and that's okay. That's what we're trying to, the quest is to keep trying to find that next Exceed or that next Street Cry. So, and I think, we're now in that next phase where, 2 Done Hot looks outstanding. Harry Angel, so exciting. Animo is just on everyone's lips. Really excited about horses like Cylinder and Broadsiding. So we've got a stallion roster that, as you said, is quite amazing, and it goes in ebbs and flows, and they won't all work out to be great. But as I mentioned, those other horses, Debawi and all them, at some stage they walked on the lawn at Kelvin side, so breeders had access to them. So you're going to get access to a Pinatubo or a Harry Angel or a Native Trail or whoever, Victor Ladorum, whoever it might be, and you're going to look back and say, wow, geez, that was obvious. But we all know it's difficult, but it shows the value of the daily shuttle stallion is vital to this industry, and it's vital to Australia. I mean, there's, the Great Winx was never here if it wasn't for a daily shuttle stallion. So, it's a really exciting part of what we do, and I think it's the real benefit of this global organisation, being able to get these shuttle horses in from other parts of the world, unbelievable racehorses, and they're pretty well priced. So it's a very, very exciting part of what we do, is selling service fees to breeders and clients.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like of all the aspects of what you're doing that the size and scope of the stallion operation is, as it was, pushing on. Things change around things, but that's the strength of that. The operation is in the stallion game, Andy, and we can probably we'll probably see. There's doesn't seem to be a step back or anything from that, does there? It seems to be like you're sort of full steam ahead on that strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And then the racing stable, or the racing string, racing horses, the stable that it was, and now multiple horses in multiple stables. It's there to promote the stallion roster. So it's either there to promote the stallion. So a bivouac winner is important to us. If Chris Fuller trains a bivouac stakes winner, that's important. If Kieran Maher trains a Pinatubo 2-year-old stakes winner, that's important to us. So the racing string is there to promote the stallions, to provide the next stallions. So we're hoping for a broadsiding or whoever it might be, and provide the mothers of the next stallions. So attempted or whoever it might be. So, it's not lost on us that you need to have a lot of racehorses to drag out an Animo every 10 years and a broadsiding every other year and a Cylinder hopefully every year. It takes a few horses, but it takes a really good program, a really good breeding program, great people on the farms, great broodmare band, and a lot of hard work, and hopefully it keeps spinning out. So you enjoy the racehorses, but they're there to hopefully either support the stallion roster or provide for the stallion roster.
And obviously the stallion roster, but that's one thing, but you do need the broodmare band, and I think you've said previously that bred pretty consistent numbers the last 6 or 7 years. Do you see that changing or maintaining the level of broodmare band that you've got at the moment?
Well, yeah, we've eked up to, just with fillies retiring off the track, we're probably going to be covering 190, 195 mares this year. So that's reasonably high. We for what we've done in the previous years. We want to maintain about 100 minimum into the stables every year. So, on that, rough 190, if I'm just rolling my eyes and thinking about it, hopefully we're attaining about 150. So there's probably 40 of them that'll get sold in foal, which we've done at Magic Millions or at Inglis in previous years. And then we keep 150 with a hope that, minimum 100, maybe 110, maybe 115 go into training. Obviously, there's a bit of attrition and there's a few horses for whatever reason can't be trained as young horses, and we just look after them in another way. But, they might end up joining the broodmare band or whatever it might be. But ultimately, if we can maintain that number of minimum 150 mares being retained with a view of 100 to 110 going to the system, we think that's a pretty good number to then be able to spin out what we're saying, which is a hope for an Animo, hope for a broadsiding. But there's certainly, a lot of value in stallion power. So, if you've got a champion stallion like Exceed and Excel, he makes it all a lot easier. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Two Done Hot continues to return. Great. Harry Angel continues to climb that ladder, and something like Animo is the next Redout's Choice or something, and that'll be fine. Then the racing stable will be strong, and with the strong racing stable, funnily enough, there's more colts that come through, and there's more stakes winning fillies that end up being the mothers of your next stallions as well. So it all works a lot easier when you've got a great stallion. So hence that's the quest of trying to find that great stallion all the time.
And I guess that success also depends on external factors like the health of the broader Australian industry. Where do you see that at the moment, Andy? I mean, you've been around for a fair while now about where things are at. I mean, there's been some challenges. There's been some political challenges as well for racing over the last 2 to 3 years. But where do you see the health of the Australian industry at the moment?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, I think it's pretty vibrant in terms of interest and youth coming through. There's obviously, some challenges with breeders, and I get that. We know that the all the metrics at the sales look pretty good, in inverted commas, but we know that some breeders are finding it hard, and we've tried to recognise that and price our stallions pretty well. I mean, I think some of our more popular horses aren't overly dear, so we're conscious of that. But, I get that there's some political issues and things going on always in the background, but that's probably not new to racing. That's just something we, as an industry, need to make sure that we're always doing the best thing by the industry. There's obviously a lot of people that are passionate about the industry and often wear an industry hat and a little bit of their own hat. But that's, as I said, that's nothing new. That's been going on for 100 years. So, but I think the interest is good. The costs are an issue in terms of, breeding a racehorse is effectively a form of manufacturing. And there's not a lot of manufacturing in Australia anymore because wage costs are high and costs are high. So trying to find a way for breeders to exist and to ensure that they can continue to breed a product is important for foal crop, important for the future of the industry. You need a decent foal crop to have, good numbers on a Saturday racing, and then you need good numbers on a Saturday race for people to bet on it and TAB turnover and on it goes. So certainly, it starts with the breeders, I think, and that's certainly an area that we're heavily involved in, and we need to make sure that the breeding industry is a vibrant industry.
Do issues like the patent at the moment sort of is going nowhere in Australia, and last week the Asian Patent Committee rejected applications from Australian PRAs, including New South Wales. Do you or Godolphin have a view of where that sits, particularly as a global business and a global industry? Do you see it as important that there is a functioning patent?
Oh, certainly. I think the lack of clarity is concerning, and I think it's vitally important. I think if you open a pedigree page, it's nice to know what you're looking at. So, the Group 1000 Guineas or the Group 1 Galaxy or the Group 1 Moya Stakes or the Group 1, whatever, means something when you look out and you open up a catalogue, and that's ultimately why I think the pattern exists, so that your bloodstock has a reference to how good a horse was. And on that, I think this constant changing of dates just adds confusion. I mean, if you look at a race like the CF4 Stakes, when it was in February, the honour roll would include horses like Let's Elope and June and whatever. Now they put it in mid-November, and it's like, well, it's a completely different race. It doesn't even correlate to what the CF4 means. So you used to be able to compare. You open up a pedigree and you know what sort of a horse that is. You say, okay, you want to CF4 back in, whatever, the fourth dam, you know what sort of a horse that is. So I think the pattern's really important to understand what your pedigree mean. We're in the business of breeding, we're in the business of stallions. So I think a strong functioning pattern that makes sense and is consistent is vital. So I think that's something that requires some clarity, obviously, and requires a resolution. And hopefully at some stage, everyone will get together and sort of that.
Andy, comprehensive. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us on Stroke Talk. Yeah, all the best for a spring. I know it's a really busy time of year, and we appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, all the best going forward.
Pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you. Good luck for the spring also.
The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The strongest collection of sire power ever assembled for an Australian 2-year-old sale will be offered at the Inglis Ready to Race sale on Thursday, October 16th. A catalogue of 222 lots has been finalised for the auction and is now available on the Inglis website. Inglis Ready to Race sale is easily the best and most progressive 2-year-old sale in the country. It has provided almost 800 individual winning graduates since 2016 at an average earning per runner of over $111,000, some 35% higher than its nearest rival. It also has the highest winners to runners ratio of any Southern Hemisphere breeze-up sale. Breeze-ups will be held at Warwick Farm, Taupo and Wangaratta ahead of the sale, with visions uploaded to the Inglis website. Check out the catalogue at inglis.com.au. Okay, Tim, we move now to breeding and bloodstock chat and discussion around that. There was a piece in your Rowe on Monday column this week I just wanted to touch on around about the end of an era of Galileo, of course, such a dominant stallion, arguably the most dominant stallion, certainly dominant stallion in Europe over the past sort of 15 years or so. He set up a dynasty at Coolmore. He's created, so many champs. He's dominated the British Classics. And last week in the English Ledger, we saw the end of an era for him with his final runner in a British Classic race.
You stay true. He ran a place behind the stablemate in that race, but that's the last. Well, he's from the last crop of Galileo, and the last horse to contest a classic in Britain. So it does bring an end of an era. And despite Galileo did shuttle for 5 seasons, I think it was, and he down to Australia, and I think he threw 5 Group 1 winners or produced 5 Group 1 winners. He wasn't unsuccessful. It's just the commercial realities, even back then, 20 years ago, how his horses took a bit of time. They want, as we're saying, even the shuttle horses they brought out, or the imported horses have won cups and things like that. They just take a bit of time, probably a bit of grounding, and more distance, of course. And, you compare that to Dubawi, who came out sort of a little bit after, or sort of, 2006 as well, 2008. Those horses are a little bit more precocious, or sprinter milers, suited the Australian market. And, perhaps if Galileo wasn't as successful in the UK, Pat, and he was based down here more often, maybe we've got the mares that would have suited him a bit more, or the trainers got to understand them. It's just an interesting facet of the industry, and how, breeders can drop off. He did get good support right through his career down here, but just, marketing, commercial reality set in, and we see that time and time again, year after year, and, some work down here, some don't.
Yeah, and it is an interesting one, and it's not just, pedigree A plus pedigree B equals superstar. It has to be, the right type of mares, the right matching, work things out. We've seen that with some of our local stars here. But even if you look at the fact that, there's still some very, very significantly successful stallions down here. Pride of Dubai is an example, one who hasn't had a lot of massive amounts of commercial success, but on-track success has been massive. So you think's probably another one too, Tim. So there's a few others around that thing as well. The other thing I wanted to touch on too, Tim, and we spoke about last week about this American sales market, and obviously Keeneland's still going on. I think book 4 was up 25%. Book 3, there's a record amount of $1 million lots. We spoke about book 1 and book 2. There's some specific circumstances at play in America, notably around the taxation in America and with what happened. And we kind of spoke a little bit about that. But beyond that, Tim, I guess that, is there something the Australian market can take out, and the Australian sales companies and breeders can take out of, the bright spot out of America and what we can apply here, do you think?
I would argue the Australian companies have done a pretty good job. They've probably led the way in terms of making sales not just a transactional sale, old school auction. It's an event, at Inglis, and sit down auditoriums, and top meals and entertainment before and after and things like that. So I think in some ways Australia and New Zealand have led the way. New Zealand's hospitality from the studs is world renowned. So a lot of the ways they've led the way. It's just, I think those tax incentives are huge at the moment. We've touched on, a little bit of the Netflix. Maybe it was overplayed, but the appeal of Netflix with the race for the crown. And you even wrote an article late last week about perhaps racing Peter Volandi's play with wanting 3 Group 1 sprints to coincide to either side of the Everest is a potential content play. Netflix, sort of those sort of, Triple Crown, for want of a better term. And, I'm not sure we can learn anything specifically, but just that it's, what does translate in the Northern Hemisphere. Perhaps some of those players come down and play down here, as, there's obviously the Cormors and names that we know, but maybe some of the others might come down and play. It'd be nice if Ammo or someone came down. No suggestions they will, but, if they're strong up there, maybe they'll see value down here with the low Australian dollar.
Yeah, indeed. And so there's a bit to play out there. I just also wanted to mention we've got the first 2-year-old trials, or first major 2-year-old trials of the spring next Monday at Randwick. It's a significant time for a bunch of sires. We're talking the generation of Home Affairs, Stay Inside, St Mark's Basilica, Palace Pier, Pinatubo, Tiger Malay, Wild Ruler, Profiteer, Extreme Warrior, Acrobat, Portland Sky, Captivant, Victor Ladorum, just to name about 10 or 12 there, that will all have their first runners this year. And they're all guaranteed to have runners in these trials, and they're all guaranteed to have runners in the first 2-year-old races of the spring. But it's a really interesting time just to see how these things step out. And often, if a sire makes a lightning start, we've seen it before, Tim, and puts them in a good position. So we'll watch that one with interest.
You wouldn't be, the numbers or the number of heats have been declining year on year pretty much. I wouldn't be surprised if it's down again this year, just from what I'm hearing with certain syndicates or trainers are taking an increasingly, I wouldn't say patient approach, but there's no need to get them up and running now when they can be just sort of coming back into work or in the paddock if you're getting them up towards Magic Millions races or, obviously it's a long year, there's obviously the autumn's pivotal, and there's the golden gift in November. So it'll be just interesting, the numbers of how many heats there are. But if you do get a first season sire winner of one of those trials, it can add, 30, 40 mares to a stallion's book. So it's quite important from the studs' point of view if they can get one that looks quite impressive early on. And Ollie Kirk did last year, and he's gone on with it. So it's not that they can, race on as well.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. We've talked about emerging stallions. Now let me throw another name into the mix. Native Trail. Breeders couldn't stop calling him the best-looking stallion on the Darley roster. And that's on top of being a champion 2-year-old and a classic winner at 3. The scary part? His foals are just as sharp as looking as he is. Like too darn hot all over again, but with his own twist. Native Trail has the looks, the race record, and now the foals to back it up. He's staring you right in the face. Native Trail, standing at Darley Kelvin side for $27,500, including GST. Finally, Tim, in the wagering world now, we move on and we'll have an article up today. I'm just pulling together now, hopefully in the next hour or so, read about the possibility that Queensland may consider reducing its point of consumption tax. The Queensland Racing Review currently being undertaken by Matt McGrath, the former ATC chairman, and obviously on behalf of Tim Mander, the racing minister. The flow out from this is that there is not maybe a glimmer of hope for the wagering industry that Queensland might concede the fact that perhaps going to 20% was a mistake and they should have gone to 15% and 15% or stayed at 15%, and that may be a much more sustainable model for them ongoing. It's an interesting point in this discussion. Clearly, there's been a few other things going on around Queensland and the funding models, but I think there's a broader recognition that point of consumption tax has a tipping point. The old Laffer curve's been getting a bit of a run around too. We saw a few examples of that at the back of the punt conference last week. And yeah, the Laffer curve, of course, which describes the relationship between consumption and taxation, whereby at some point, there'll be a certain amount of taxation which will disincentivize consumption and reduce consumption. Look, wagering's probably hit that point. It probably hit that point. Like the ACT is a fine example. ACT moved to 25% POCT, and now their government are getting significantly less money in the door than what they did when POCT was sort of 15%. So it is an interesting point and probably an inflection point within the discussion. We're likely to hear something about that Queensland Racing View in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Certainly, we think that stakeholders will be consulted about it, and then moving on from there. So it's an interesting point from that point of view. I want to sort of to put that on the agenda. The other thing I wanted to talk about quickly was and a story we've covered extensively over the last 7 months. Mixi officially now has 66% of PointsBet. That gives them basically a hold over the company. They won't be able to take it private, which is probably what they wanted to do in terms of a full ownership of it, because Betr still owns 20%, and obviously there's the math would say there's another 15% worth of shareholders there that haven't sold out as yet. But effectively what happens is Mixi takes control of the board. They won't give Betr a seat at the board. I've been told operationally nothing changes for PointsBet. So PointsBet, which is probably a 5 to 6% market shareholder in Australia, will stay the same. So still think there's a little bit to play out there, but I think from that perspective, at least from a corporate control perspective, it changes. The other thing I want to mention, Tim, and one I want to discuss with you, given our experience within the media, there is a growing sense of, anxiety or concern within the wagering space about an upcoming Four Corners piece around the wagering industry, where things sit. Obviously, it's a pinch point for the industry at the moment around the federal government gambling regulations. There's coverage. We know the cameras turned up at the back of the punt conference to try to film a few people going in and out. They've been seen outside. ABC cameras have been seen outside major wagering companies. What probably surprised me a little bit, Tim, I'd be interested to see your view on this. Scrutiny and media scrutiny is what is natural in any industry as big as what wagering is. Does wagering need to get used to the fact that broader scrutiny is part of the way that they operate? And sometimes that's going to be unwanted coverage, and it's how you deal with that which determines your success as an industry.
Yes, well, trying to hide from it is just not going to help anything. They should, responsible wagering Australia get on the front foot. It depends what the angle that Four Corners are going down, but you'd think Entain will form part of that, given the charges they're facing and fines and different things like that. I think they need to be proactive and putting their case forward. They, being careful the messages they put out there, but they can't just let, the anti-gambling side of the argument control the whole narrative. They've got to they can't control the story specifically, but they can put their case forward. I think that's a far better way than just hiding from it and, not being transparent. It is, gambling's, it's not prohibited, so it should be, prosecuted that it is a good pastime for a lot of people. There's not hiding from gambling problems or issues for certain small percentage of the population, but I think the industry has to tackle it head on, no matter what sort of argument or case that the media's going for, or ABC's going for in that case particularly.
Yeah, and I think if you're a multi-billion-dollar industry, you can't say it's not fair that we're being cameras pointed at us. Like, it's how you discuss those things. And there are things that have happened within the past that aren't desirable. There are people that get significantly badly affected by this industry, and I'm sure that those people will feature quite prominently within this. I mean, it's hard to argue against people who've had their lives ruined by gambling. Like, people have had their lives ruined by gambling. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that impacts what goes on in the rest of society in terms of you have to have safeguards in place. And from my perspective, the wagering industry has to have its house in order to make sure that everything's clean and worked out. I know that there has been representatives of the industry, including Responsible Wagering Australia, which have spoken to this. I think it's important that people do that, to have spoken to Four Corners and put themselves out there. Sometimes you've got to get whacked over the head. This is what happens. But I think sitting there going, oh, this is a typical biased ABC agenda that's going to be, whacking what we do and curtailing what we do, I don't think that's a necessarily productive discussion. I think the discussion needs to be the wagering industry needs to show its value to the community. That's part of what happens. Media strategy is part of that. And like I said, hiding in behind, buildings or sitting there going, oh, well, we don't have to reveal anything. I don't necessarily think that helps. But anyway, interesting time. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I dare say, given previous experience, that it might be around Everest week that we see that come out publicly, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And the guy that's actually conducting that, Steve Canane, is a well-respected journalist. Journalists have got to cover the stories, as we know, Tim. Sometimes, you upset people and whatever else. It's not their job not to upset people. There's an old line about journalism that if you're not upsetting someone, then it's not journalism, it's public relations. So something we try to think about every day when we're trying to do our job, Tim, but sometimes that's not easy to make. Strike that balance. We try our very best to make sure that we're putting forward a clear and independent view, and sometimes that involves ruffling feathers. Thanks for joining us here on Straight Talk, brought to you by Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, and be sure to subscribe on our various platforms. There's plenty of places you can access us on. Obviously, if you're watching us now or you're listening to us now, we're on Apple, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, all the things you can watch. So, don't forget to send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au. Any questions you may have, we might talk about, and we'll talk to you again next week.